Everybody, and thanks for watching my video. This is episode number 20 of the Ketogenic Fasting Project, and today I'm talking about diabetes, which is commonly known as a worldwide epidemic. It's another reason why I don't like to focus too much on the standard American diet, or what's called the SAD diet, or the typical Western diet. I mean, all that's kind of irrelevant when you have a global epidemic, right? So I like to think that by having a detailed understanding, or at least knowing as much as we can about what's going wrong, we won't miss the opportunities to make improvements. So that's why I'm doing something specifically on diabetics or diabetes, even though the ketogenic fasting project isn't necessarily about diabetes, but diabetes is considered the low-hanging fruit when it comes to a ketogenic diet, because if you have type 2 diabetes, you got almost a guaranteed cure up until the final stages of diabetes, at least type 2. So today we're going to talk about type 1 diabetes, which is a lesser known and happens to fewer people and generally happens in young people. Type 2 diabetes, which is really common and growing, not just in the United States, but in China, Puerto Rico, just all over the planet, really. The Middle East is plagued with it right now. A lot of the people in the Middle East are genetically predisposed to type 2 diabetes on a level that the rest of the world doesn't really see. And then the new mysterious emerging type 3 diabetes. Yes, type 3 diabetes. So let's get started with some basic understanding. Diabetes generally is related to insulin levels. So the pancreas, which is an organ that we have, contains what are known as beta cells, and beta cells are responsible for producing insulin. The insulin is released to lower blood sugar, right? So when the body detects blood sugar, it will, in theory, release an appropriate amount of insulin to bring that blood sugar down. This is part of staying alive, because if your blood sugar gets too high, you'll go into a coma. If it's really high and stays high, then you will die. So this is one of those systems that your body's always trying to regulate. It's trying to keep that blood sugar within a certain range. Although, as you find out when you've been on a ketogenic or a really low carb diet, once you're used to having low blood sugar, or being in a state of low blood sugar, you don't feel any negative consequences to having low blood sugar. But if you're a carbohydrate eater, if you're regularly ingesting carbohydrates, particularly the processed, sugars and flours and stuff like that, you feel your blood sugar drop. You can feel queasy or sick or whatever. You feel like you need to eat. You get hangry, you get cranky, you get all that. But if you go on the ketogenic diet and you get adapted, you realize, well, my blood sugar can drop very low, and I don't feel any different. I know, I think I've gotten mine down. I think the lowest I ever recorded was 36, which is unusual. But typically, my blood sugar is like 70 or something like that, and sometimes it'll be down in the 70s. I think that um, your levels anywhere above that, when you're used to it, are just fine. They did some experiments in the past that aren't legal anymore, where they gave people insulin to drive down their blood sugar, and these are people on a normal diet with plenty of carbs, and it made them feel sick, and then they put them on a ketogenic diet and give them the insulin, a couple of weeks later, and drive down their blood sugar, which was to levels that were previously considered low or dangerous, and they didn't have any side effects. And so that's something I've experienced myself. I'm not saying everybody needs to go out there and drive down their blood sugar, and I certainly wouldn't take insulin if I had low blood sugar. But it is one of the things that you find out. It's like, to me, it was like, wow, the things that the human body is capable of doing naturally with that really should not be a big deal seem like drastic, crazy ideas just to me just a couple years ago, less than 2 years ago. So it's just one more thing that we're learning, that you don't need blood sugar. Your yeah, I don't mean you don't need any blood sugar. You don't need what people typically have as blood sugar levels. Your liver is perfectly capable of making all the sugar you need, so you don't have to eat it. Okay. Type 1 diabetes is typically an autoimmune disease that's early onset. So the immune system typically attacks the beta cells in the pancreas. And some people suspect that this is caused by exposure to casein A1, which is a protein found in the milk of Holstein cows. Now, I don't really know much about the science behind why people believe that, but supposedly the casein A1 protein is very similar to the beta cell, and when the casein A1 passes through the intestinal barrier into the bloodstream and the immune system detects it as an invader, starts producing antibodies, and these antibodies attack the casein A1, they also attack the beta cells in the pancreas and cause type 1 diabetes. So I imagine that there's other causes for this that I don't know about, but that's kind of a nutshell sort of concept. I don't think it's widely accepted that casein A1 is involved in causing type 1 diabetes, but it is something that's mentioned in the literature by several different people. So once your beta cells or most of your beta cells have been destroyed, you can't produce insulin, or you cannot produce enough. So your body loses its ability to reduce blood sugar, and that's a very serious situation. And before insulin was discovered and before they were able to produce it, it was pretty much a lethal diagnosis. Or I'd imagine most people just died and they weren't even sure why. So type 1 diabetes is a very serious situation. People have to monitor their intake and then address it appropriately with administering insulin. And these people, with doctor supervision, oftentimes do very well on ketogenic diets. So. Type 2 diabetes, typically the pancreas works fine, at least for the first few decades, and it's just cranking out insulin to combat the high blood sugar. So sometimes towards the end, the pancreas gets worn out, the beta cells are just overworked and stop working. But with the other cells in the body, also they get hammered with so much insulin, they become insulin resistant, both from overexposure, because hormones like insulin are supposed to be pulsatile. They're supposed to come out in small doses periodically. You're not supposed to be releasing them constantly, which is what happens when you eat frequently. It's what happens when you're exposed to a lot of carbohydrates, particularly the refined ones. And after decades of this going on, you become insulin resistant, not just from overexposure and the cells just building some sort of tolerance to it, but the cells are also full of sugar. The insulin's telling your body, hey, absorb the sugar out of the bloodstream, stored in the cells in the tissue, and then the insulin comes back around, and the cells are like, yeah, we're already full, move on, because we already have too much sugar. So that's a whole nother reason why people become insulin resistant. That's part of the metabolic disease, and that's part of pre-diabetes, and that's part of why people's blood sugar continues to climb. The extra sugar in the cells causes infections. So one of the reasons why people get lesions, especially in the lower extremities and the feet, and have to have amputations. It's why nerve cells start dying and they get neuropathy. It's why they go blind. It's the inflammation caused by the sugar causes things like the plaques to accumulate in the arterial walls, the coronary arteries. This causes heart disease, which is usually what kills people, diabetics in modern time, because they're managing with insulin and medication to try and keep their blood sugar within a safe range. But the heart disease piles up. So this is all part of the metabolic syndrome. Um, I already covered all this, unfortunately. I just jumped a slide, but here we go. Type 2 diabetes, too much sugar in the cells, causes neuropathy, blindness, requires amputation, and usually leads to death by heart disease. So right here we tie carbohydrates to heart disease. So try and keep those carbohydrates out of an excessive range, even if you don't want to be on a ketogenic diet. Type 3 diabetes is kind of an emerging concept, and I think I kind of witnessed this myself. My grandmother loved her sweets, especially it seemed like the older she got, the more candy and cookies she ate and the less of other food. And she had Alzheimer's. And the idea is that the metabolism gets so damaged that the brain is no longer able to clear itself of the amyloid plaques, which just keep accumulating in the brain tissue and causes the classic Alzheimer's, which really can only be determined after death, because they have to look inside the brain and see the accumulation. But a lot of people are thinking this is another symptom of people who didn't have an earlier onset of type 2 diabetes. They managed to keep metabolizing enough carbohydrates that their system is no longer able to maintain the function of clearing away the amyloid plaques. So the current theory is that this is a type 3 diabetes at work, causing this new plague of Alzheimer's, which is horrific to witness and also of great concern for the future, because it's going to be very expensive to take care of all these people with Alzheimer's in the future, because the Alzheimer's, like autism and obesity and diabetes, is on the rise, a frightening pace too. So diabetes in general, related to the pancreas and the beta cells in the pancreas. I happen to have an online pal tell me a story about her and her twin sister were born to a mother with gestational diabetes that was undiagnosed. And because their mother had gestational diabetes, both of the girls were born with enlarged pancreases. And because they have large pancreases that are capable of producing very large insulin loads, when they eat sugar, something sweet, the pancreas over responds, delivers too much insulin, and they go into insulin shock. So what happens is their blood sugar starts rising based on something they ate. Their pancreas responds by releasing insulin, but it's too high of a dose for the average human, and so their blood sugar plummets suddenly, and then they feel very sick. So just an interesting side note, but to give people a little more perspective on what's going on in that system. Again, I want to thank you guys for watching the Ketogenic Fasting Project. I really hope this helps somebody out there. Please stay excited. Please subscribe and let me know what other topics you want to talk about.